The front door hadn't even finished closing behind us when my stepfather's voice cut through the silence. "Pack your things." I looked up, still wearing the black dress I'd stood in beside my mother's grave only an hour earlier. "What?" "You heard me." Richard folded his arms and glanced around the living room as if he were already inspecting property he had just purchased. "Your mother is gone. This house is mine now. You're 24, you're not living here anymore." I stared at him, waiting for the smallest sign that grief was speaking instead of cruelty. "There has to be a better time to talk about this," I said quietly. "There isn't." His expression never changed. "You don't have a claim here, you don't have money, you don't have anywhere else to go. Frankly, that's not my problem." He expected me to argue. He expected tears. He expected me to beg. Instead, I nodded once. "Okay." For the first time, he looked almost disappointed. Without another word, I walked upstairs and pulled a single suitcase from my closet. He smiled as if he'd already won. What he didn't know was that my mother had spent years preparing me for this exact moment. The house still smelled faintly of the lilies people had delivered after the funeral. Sympathy cards covered the dining room table, and framed family photographs sat beside half-burned candles. Just hours earlier, relatives had filled every room, speaking in hushed voices about how sudden my mother's illness had become. Now the silence felt almost unreal. Richard followed me upstairs, watching from the hallway while I packed only clothes, toiletries, and a few personal keepsakes. "That's all you're taking?" he asked. "I only need what's mine." He laughed. "That's not much." I zipped the suitcase without answering. Every object I left behind seemed to make him more confident. He wandered into my mother's bedroom, already talking aloud about repainting the walls and replacing the furniture. It was as though 20 years of marriage had ended not with heartbreak, but with an inventory checklist. When I carried my suitcase downstairs, he opened the front door before I reached it. "I'll have the locks changed tomorrow." I paused. "Do you really want me gone the same day we buried Mom?" "I've made my decision." "So have I." He frowned, confused by how calm I sounded. Outside, the evening air was cold. I placed my suitcase beside the driveway and looked back at the only home I'd known since I was 12. Then I unlocked my phone and opened one contact. Martin Ellis. My mother's attorney. I typed only 4 words. "It's time, I'm ready." The reply appeared almost instantly. "I've been expecting your call." Instead of calling friends or searching for another place to stay, I checked into a modest hotel a few miles away. The room was small, the furniture outdated, and the only sound was the steady hum of the air conditioner. I set my suitcase beside the bed and carefully laid my mother's photo album on the nightstand. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to cry. Not because Richard had thrown me out. Because the one person who had always protected me was gone. As I wiped my eyes, I remembered something Mom had told me years earlier, while we sat together on our apartment balcony after dinner. "Nadia," she'd said, "never tell people what you own." I had laughed. "Why not?" "Because money changes people. If someone only respects you after they know you're wealthy, they never respected you in the first place." She had looked directly at me. "And never reveal what's yours until you absolutely have to. Let people show you who they really are." At the time, I thought she was simply being cautious. Now I understood she had been preparing me. The next morning, I met Martin Ellis at his downtown office. He greeted me with genuine sympathy before placing a thick folder on the conference table. "Your mother left very specific instructions," he said gently. "Nothing moves forward until you authorize it." He slid the documents toward me but didn't open them. "You don't have to make any decisions today." I rested my hand on the folder without lifting the cover. Did she really think this would happen? Martin sighed. She hoped it wouldn't. His answer lingered in the room. I could activate everything immediately. Instead, I shook my head. "I want to give Richard one chance." Martin studied me for a moment before nodding. "Then make sure it's your last." An hour later, I returned to the house carrying an empty tote bag. I wasn't there for furniture or valuables. I only wanted family photographs that belonged to my mother. Richard opened the door just enough to block the entrance. I thought I made myself clear. I'm here for Mom's photo albums. They're in my house now. They're memories, Richard. They're property. I looked past him into the hallway, where family portraits still hung on the walls. I'll be in and out in 5 minutes. No. Before I could answer, he disappeared inside. A second later, the front door swung open again. The photo album landed on the front lawn, its pages scattering across the grass. I knelt silently, gathering the loose photographs one by one. When I stood, I brushed the dirt from the cover and looked him in the eye. "Thank you," I said calmly. He frowned. "For making your position perfectly clear." I turned toward my car. "Then I guess there's nothing left to protect." The room fell silent as Martin opened the final binder. Richard remained standing, one hand pressed against the conference table. "I want to see every page," he demanded. "You will," Martin replied evenly. "But first, everyone here deserves to understand why these documents exist." He removed a certified property record and placed it in the center of the table. "This is the ownership history of the Chicago office tower." Richard leaned forward, barely glancing at the first page before scoffing. "My wife's building." Martin looked directly at him. "No." He turned the document so everyone could read it. "This property has been legally titled to Nadia Carter for several years." The room erupted with confused whispers. Richard grabbed the papers. "These aren't real." "They were filed years before your wife passed away," Martin answered. "Every transfer was completed while she was alive, fully competent, and represented by independent counsel." Richard flipped through page after page, searching for something, anything, that would prove him right. Instead, every signature matched. Every date lined up. Every seal was official. His confidence began slipping away. Martin calmly reached for another folder. "And this concerns the trust." Richard laughed nervously. "There isn't any trust." Martin opened the folder. "There is." He slid the documents toward Nadia first before addressing everyone else. "This trust contains $31 million. It was established solely for Nadia's benefit and is legally separate from the marital estate." Richard's face drained of color. "No, it cannot be inherited by a surviving spouse," Martin continued. "It cannot be transferred. It cannot be contested on the grounds you've suggested." Across the table, Richard's sister slowly turned toward him. "You told us everything belonged to you." No one answered. Another relative cleared his throat. "I remember you saying you'd sell the house immediately." "And didn't you already start talking about buying that condo in Florida?" someone else asked. Richard looked around the room. Nobody was agreeing with him anymore. Everyone was staring. He pointed at Nadia. "She planned this." Nadia finally spoke. "My mother planned it." Martin nodded. "Years ago." Richard's voice rose again. "This is a setup." "It is an estate plan," Martin corrected. "There's a significant difference." He reached into the binder one last time. "There's one more matter." Richard froze. Martin placed several documents on the table. "Before ownership was legally confirmed, you attempted to remove Nadia from property connected to this estate and represented assets as your own." Richard swallowed. I was just. The court may view those actions differently." The room grew painfully quiet. For the first time since the funeral, Richard had nothing left to say. His shoulders sagged. His hands trembled. Slowly, almost mechanically, he lowered himself back into his chair. Martin closed the binder and rested his hand on it. "This concludes the ownership review." Richard stared at the documents in front of him. finally understanding that everything he believed he owned had never belonged to him at all. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence was finally broken by Martin. "Before Alina signed these documents," he said, looking around the table, "she left written instructions explaining exactly why she structured her estate this way." He unfolded a letter. She believed that wealth should protect character, not replace it. Everyone listened. Years ago, she became concerned that Nadia might one day be valued for what she owned instead of who she was. She instructed us to keep the trust and the office tower confidential, unless circumstances made disclosure absolutely necessary. Martin looked toward Nadia. She hoped that day would never come. Nadia lowered her eyes. "I hoped so too." She took a slow breath before facing Richard. "I never wanted your money." Richard looked exhausted. "I wanted a family." The words hit harder than any accusation. "I thought after all these years, you cared about me because I was your stepdaughter." She paused. "I was wrong." Richard opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. His sister quietly shook her head. "You threw her out the day we buried Alina." Another relative added softly, "You didn't even wait until the next morning." One by one, family members stood and walked toward Nadia. "I'm sorry," her aunt said. "We believed what Richard told us." "So did I," another cousin admitted. "We should have asked you first." Nadia accepted their apologies with a small nod. "I don't want anyone choosing sides," she said. "I just want the truth to stay where everyone can see it." Over the following months, that truth changed everything. Richard's attempts to challenge the estate failed because every transfer had been completed years before Alina's death. The court upheld the trust exactly as it had been written, and the office tower remained solely under Nadia's ownership. The relatives who had once assumed Richard would inherit everything gradually distanced themselves from him. It wasn't because he lost money. It was because they had watched what he chose to do before he knew the truth. His plans to sell property and build a new life with an inheritance that was never his disappeared completely. Nadia chose a different path. Rather than celebrating Richard's downfall, she met with financial advisors and property managers to ensure the Chicago office tower continued serving the businesses that depended on it. She also established a scholarship in her mother's name for students who had lost a parent while pursuing college. At the dedication ceremony, she kept her speech short. "My mother believed the greatest gift you can leave someone isn't wealth," she said. "It's the opportunity to build a better life." Months later, Nadia visited her mother's favorite park. She sat on the same bench where they had shared countless conversations over the years. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Her mother had protected far more than money. She had protected her daughter's future, her independence, and the chance for people's true character to reveal itself. As the Chicago skyline stretched across the horizon, Nadia smiled softly. The day she walked away carrying one suitcase wasn't the day she lost everything. It was the day she finally stepped into the life her mother had been quietly preparing for all along.